I'm Jacob Krueger, and this is the Write Your Screenplay Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most important tools in your arsenal as a TV writer, the TV Bible. So what's the TV Bible anyway? If you go back in history, a TV Bible was not a sales document. If you actually go back in history, in fact, I was talking about this with Jerry Perzigian years ago. Jerry is a member of our faculty, a multiple Emmy Award-winning showrunner, was a showrunner on Married with Children, The Jeffersons, The Golden Girls. He was a writer on Frasier, The Nanny, right? If it was a hit show in the 80s or 90s, Jerry was on it or running it. And we were talking about TV Bibles. This is maybe 15 years ago when I first hired Jerry, and Jerry said, "Oh, you mean the thing the intern puts together?" See, it used to be that a TV Bible was something that was created by an intern on the staff, because what happened on these really long-running shows was that eventually the original staff writers left. These shows ran for so many years that sometimes even the original showrunner left. And they would hire a brand new writer, and that writer would need to come on board, but they wouldn't have the institutional knowledge that they needed in order to actually know, well, what can happen and what cannot happen on the show. How do we come up with episode after episode after episode after episode after episode after episode, and each episode feels the same but also different? What are the kinds of things that characters do, and what are the kinds of things that characters never do? Now, remember, this is back in the day before TV shows arced. We'll talk a little bit more about what does it mean to build a TV show that arcs, which is nearly every TV show today. But back in the day, TV shows made money through syndication, meaning that after you did your network run, you would sell your show to Nick at Night or whatever syndicating service that you were selling it to, and they might show those episodes out of order, meaning you might watch episode 237 of Seinfeld, and then you might watch episode 1 of Seinfeld. And if you watched them out of order, episode 1 and episode 247 needed to make sense without having all the context around them. And that used to be how TV shows made money. And that was the business model for how TV shows were consumed. Remember, this is before streaming. You couldn't just watch Seinfeld when you wanted to. You either saw it when it aired, or you caught a rerun out of order. Now, in today's market, the way that people consume television has completely changed. In today's market, people consume television by binging. And this has allowed TV writers a gift, right? So it used to be that you couldn't arc your characters, meaning your character couldn't change. Jerry Seinfeld needed to be the same guy in episode 1 as he was in episode 250. Whereas Larry David in Curb Your Enthusiasm, even though he's still kind of the same guy, can actually go on a journey. He can go through changes. You don't need to worry about your audience keeping up with the plot because they're watching your episodes in order, one after another, binging. So this has basically allowed TV writers a whole other tool, but it's also made the job of creating the Bible harder. And it's made the job of capturing the engine of your show harder. So let's define some terms. Your pilot. Your pilot is basically everything that a feature does, plus. People often think, oh, a pilot must be easier to write than a feature. It's shorter. But actually, exactly the opposite is true. In a pilot, you have fewer pages to do more work. In other words, in a screenplay, let's say we get 90 pages to take a character on an A to Z change. In a TV pilot, we have, if it's a TV drama, 44 to 60 pages, depending on whether or not we have commercials and what streaming service or television station we are writing for. If it's a TV comedy, we're somewhere between 22 and 30 pages. And we still need to take that character on that A to Z journey in that pilot, just as if it was a feature film. So we actually have to be more efficient writers in order to write a pilot. That gets complicated even more because most pilots, this is not true of all pilots, but most pilots have A stories and B stories and C stories, sometimes even a D or an E or an F story, meaning we're not just following the main character as we would in a feature film. We're following the main character, but we're also following character B and character C and character D, and sometimes we're watching them in scenes that the main character is not a part of. And what that means is that we have even fewer pages. So let's say we're writing a drama and we've got 44 to 60 pages. Well, we don't actually have 44 to 60 pages to take that character on the journey of their life. We actually have maybe 30 pages because maybe 15 of those other pages are going to other characters, to B stories, C stories, D stories, etc. Because we have these ensembles, because every TV show is built out of a cast, and because most TV shows don't just follow our main characters, TV writers have to be better at structure and more efficient than feature film writers. This is why on day 3 of my Write Your TV series class, we actually break down the first 10 minutes of Game of Thrones, and we look moment by moment, detail by detail, at how these writers are moving with such efficiency. And even on top of that, we look at the original pilot, which is not actually that well written. They stopped production on it because it wasn't working. And I show you how they increased the efficiency of what on the page looks like a relatively good scene to actually make it do what it needs to do as a pilot. So the first thing you need to know, a pilot is a feature film in less time with less pages that does the same thing a feature film does. Takes a character, makes us fall in love with them, takes them on a profound journey from A to Z. But that's not all that a pilot does. The next thing that a pilot does is it creates a blueprint for every single episode that's going to come after it. If you need to figure out how to write episode 2 or how to write episode 22 or how to write episode 102, the DNA of that, the bones of that, are in the pilot. And in this way, your pilot is a blueprint. It's a business plan. It is showing your reader these are the replicable elements that are going to replicate episode after episode after episode. These are the kinds of characters you're going to meet, and these are the roles they're going to play, and these are the kinds of things that are going to happen episode after episode after episode. This is the structure of the piece. This is how it's going to work. These are the areas of research that you're going to need to look into in order to generate episode after episode after episode. So your pilot is a feature film, and it's a blueprint/business plan. When you build a pilot, it's like building any franchise. Yes, the McDonald's at the airport is a little bit different than the McDonald's in your local neighborhood, and that's a little bit different than the McDonald's at a Times Square. But there's a very specific formula that goes into making sure that every McDonald's feels like every other McDonald's. Same is true with a pilot. You are building a unique formula when you build a pilot. And I want to emphasize that word unique. If you think that you can steal the formula of some other show, you are wrong. Your show needs to feel different. So you could argue that The Pit is just ER, but it's not, right? The Pit is ER with a twist. Right? It's its own formula with this 24-hour ticking clock, right? It's its own thing. Yes, we can replicate elements of different shows, but ultimately, the thing that's going to differentiate your show is that your show feels different from every other show. Curb Your Enthusiasm and Seinfeld are built on the exact same model, but the shows feel slightly different. They have a slightly different formula. So the thing that you need to remember is that when you build your pilot, you're not just building a pilot. You're not just building an arc, a journey, a character. You're not just building an ensemble. You're building a model. When A reader, if you want to sell this, right? If you want to get staffed on a show, if you want this to be a viable writing sample as a TV show, and if you want this to have a chance of getting a showrunner attached and getting your show actually made, if you want to have a chance at doing that, when the reader gets to the end of your pilot, they can't just go, oh, what a great show. They also have to go, oh, I think I know how this works. In other words, I think I can just from having read that pilot, I can imagine how I could run this for 3 years, for 5 years, maybe even for 10 years. I can see how I could keep generating episodes that feel the same but also different. I understand how the pressure between these characters can play out episode after episode after episode after episode, and I'm not going to run out of steam. And what often a producer will say, or an agent or a manager will say, they'll say, does it have legs, right? In other words, is this going to become tired after 3 episodes, after 6 episodes? Am I going to run out of steam? Right? Is this going to be the first season of Heroes where like the first 6 episodes are the greatest thing you've ever seen in your life, and then you wait season after season for it to finally get good again? Or is this going to be The Boys where episode after episode after episode, it's going to get better and better and better, and it's going to feel the same, but it's also going to feel different, where the characters go on journeys and change, but they're also going to stay the same, where it's going to deliver the same genre experience again and again and again, and where you can literally generate episodes forever because of what is called the engine. So by the time your reader makes it to the end of the pilot, they should already feel what the engine is. They should already, if they're an intelligent reader, and if they're an experienced reader, right? Can't protect yourself from a brand new coverage reader. But if they are an experienced producer, manager, agent who works in television, they should be able to say, oh, I get it. I can project how this might work. But then another thing happens to them, which is they get scared. They get especially scared because you are a new writer. I'm going to make the assumption we do have some really wonderful professional writers who listen to this podcast, but 90% of you who are listening are new writers. Or maybe you're early career writers, or even maybe you're mid-career writers, but you are not yet maybe that juggernaut that's made hundreds of millions of dollars for people who they just trust your word when you say, hey, trust me, this is going to work. And even if you are one of those people, they still are scared. They're scared because, hey, we watched The Wire, and then we watched Treme. And hey, there's a lot of great elements to Treme, but halfway through Treme, somebody died. One of the producers died, and suddenly the engine got lost. This is halfway through the first season, and suddenly the show is not working anymore. And they were lucky. HBO stuck with them until they found their footing again. But that's a scary thing for the studio, right? That's a scary thing for the producer. And if you're a young development executive, you're a young agent, you're a young manager, right? You are a young producer. You're early in your career. Then trust me, you've already had the experience of going into your boss with an idea that you think is freaking awesome. And you pitch it to them, and they go, this thing has no legs. This is not going to work. Because they have more experience than you, and they can see what's broken in the engine before you see it. And similarly, if you're a mid-career producer, you're an experienced producer, experienced agent, you're an experienced manager, even then, you probably had the experience of a show that you thought was going to work, but now it didn't work. And so you're scared that's going to happen to you, right? You're scared the show's not going to work. You're scared that maybe your instincts are wrong. Maybe it's actually not going to work. And you're especially scared because the person who brought it to you is not already famous. So that means you're staking your reputation when you go to fight for this project. You can't sit back and go like, well, who would have thought it would have been a flop? Look what their last thing did. You're putting your job and you're putting your career on the line to go fight for this project. So you're going to get scared. That is why the Bible is so important. What the Bible basically does for that producer, that agent, that manager, that development executive who got excited about your pilot, it goes, hey, buddy, you're right. You're right. This is actually as good as you thought it was going to be. You know what? This is actually even better than you thought it was going to be. Here's how it all works. Here's how the characters work together to create that feeling. Here's how it's going to work over the first season, but here's also how it's going to work over seasons 2, 3, 4, 5. Here is basically the secret sauce that allows you to make this forever. And guess what? Here are the little tricks I have up my sleeve that you didn't even see coming, that are going to allow that engine to continue to get more and more interesting. Here are the things that I saw that you didn't see yet, that makes you go, oh, not only is this writer as good as I thought they were, they're better. I don't have to be stressed at all. So what your Bible actually is, it's a prover that goes along with your pilot to go, yes, you were right. Yes, this works. Now, if you are already, a top A-list level screenwriter, you probably don't even need a pilot. You can probably sell your idea off of a Bible or off of a pitch. In other words, hey, here's my awesome formula for an awesome show. Here's the idea. Here's how it works. Here's how all the characters come together. Here is the model. Here's why we can run it forever. Here's how we generate this. Here's why I don't need the greatest writers in the world. Even if I were to walk off of this, here's how you could generate this forever and it's still going to work. Yeah, if you're at that level, maybe you can sell off of a pilot. But if you are an early to mid-career screenwriter, forget it. It's not happening for you. Even during the golden age of TV that we just went through when the demand was so huge, it wasn't true. But in today's market, which is more compressed and even more competitive, it's even more untrue. You're not going to sell your TV show off of a great idea. You're going to sell your TV show off of a great pilot that's connected to a great Bible. You're not going to sell your Bible without the pilot. But it's also very unlikely that you're going to sell your pilot without the Bible. So, pilot, the most important element. If your pilot's not working and you're a new writer, it doesn't matter how good your idea is. And when I say working, I don't just mean good. I mean world class. I mean, wow, I've never read a script like this before. I've never read a script of this quality, right? We're talking about the kinds of things that Steve Bagatorian teaches in The Craft. We're talking about compelling characters that real stars are going to want to play, that they're going to want to inhabit because they're complicated and interesting. We're talking about lines of dialogue and images and action that are captivating. And these are all things that you can develop for yourself. You can learn. This is just work. And this is one of the few places where you can actually compete with the professional writers. Because the professional writers don't have time to do this. They've got agents and managers. They've got work for hire projects. They're working on 3 or 4 projects at a time. Those projects have deadlines. They've got to get them done quickly. And that kind of work isn't quick. This is the place where you can actually compete, where somebody can read your pilot and go, wow. And even if they can't make that pilot where they go, wow, I want that writer on my next show. I want that writer to do this rewrite. I want to see what else that writer has, right? This is how you build fans. You must, in this market, you must have great pilots. You must have a library of great pilots. So you can kind of think of the pilot as the hook that hooks the fish. The Bible is what reels them in. The Bible goes, yes, you were right. Yes, this is as compelling as you thought it was going to be. Yes, I have even more tricks up my sleeve. And yes, here, in a very compelling, exciting way, is the formula by which all of this works forever. That's what a Bible is. And that's why it's so important to have 2. Now, what both pilot and Bible are actually tools to generate is a very simple concept, and also probably one of the hardest concepts in screenwriting, which is called engine. Engine is the formula that makes every single episode feel both the same and different. So your pilot demonstrates the engine by creating that blueprint of what the characters do and what their journey is, and by giving that really strong genre feeling, that really strong impression of this is my emotional experience of the show. What the Bible does is demonstrate that engine in an equally compelling. Your Bible cannot be boring or no one will read it. Executives already don't want to read. In fact, the most important thing about your Bible is it has to feel like the show. If your Bible doesn't feel like the show, right, that's like showing a blueprint to somebody who doesn't know how to read a blueprint. No, you want to show them the computer-generated model so they can see it and it looks cool, right? Or you want to show them the physical model, so right. So your Bible, the writing of your Bible, has to be as compelling as the writing of your script. But it's a different form of writing, right? That's why we teach a class on it. That's why we teach Write Your TV series. It takes time to learn this form of writing, and it's different from screenwriting. What your Bible is doing is it's demonstrating, okay, here's the secret sauce of how that engine works, right? These are the elements that combine to make this engine and to make it go, to make this show go episode after episode, and each episode feels like the other episodes. To make this show go season after season, and each season feels like the other seasons. And because most of today's shows arc, right, it shows you, okay, this is how the characters arc in the pilot. This is how they arc over the seasons, but also this is how I reset at the beginning of next season so that this season and season 2 and season 3 can feel the same. You all saw most likely The Last of Us, right? One of the real hit shows over the last several years. And you saw what they did in the sublime season 1. And you saw what happened in season 2. You saw what happened, and I have a whole podcast on this if you want to go back to how that engine broke. But you saw what happened when they broke their engine and how angry the fans were. They were angry. Yes, they were angry because of some plot choices that were made, but that's not really why they were angry. They were angry because the show no longer felt like it used to feel. And the reason it no longer felt that way was because they failed to successfully reset their engine. The same is true of The Bear. Season 1, absolutely sublime. I have a podcast on this too. And in an amazing way, they went back and they reset the engine for season 2, and it felt both the same and different. It was like I was watching the same show again, but different things were happening. I was watching the same characters again, but different things were happening. I was getting that same feeling delivered again, even though different things were happening. And then you saw what happened in season 3. And again, how out for blood the fan base was. People who loved the show were suddenly outraged because the show felt different. And it's not that the different feeling is wrong. It's not, I'm not even saying that one season is a better feeling than the other. I'm saying that once you sell an audience a feeling, that is the feeling they're coming back for again and again and again. Just like your pilot is the hook and your Bible is the tool that reels them in, the feeling that you give the audience in your pilot is the hook. And it's replicating that feeling that keeps reeling them back in. It doesn't matter how good your episode 2 is. If it doesn't feel like the pilot, it's not going to work. Jonathan Redding, who teaches on our faculty, another wonderful ProTrack mentor. He teaches our ProTrack mentorship program. He's an expert in horror and thriller and all forms of genre. And he was a writer on Homeland for many years. And as a writer on Homeland, he talks about how Homeland, after season 1, realized that their engine was something different than they thought. They had planned to kill off Carrie's love interest in that show at the end of season 1. But they realized, oh my God, this is actually what the audience is tuning in for. They're tuning in for this love interest. And they kept him alive for another season, but then they ran out of speed on that. But they knew that ultimately the audience was tuning in for that complicated love interest, right? There was going to be a love interest who was exactly the wrong person for this woman who loves her country, but who's dealing with a mental health problem. Exactly the wrong person for her to be connected to. Exactly the person that would most make the people that she needs to trust her not do so. Right? The secret behind everything that happens in Homeland is she's just Cassandra, right? From the ancient Greek myth, the character who can see the future, but nobody believes her. In this case, because she has some mental health issues. She has some bipolar issues. And because always at the center is this beautiful but really complicated love story with the wrong dude. That causes secrets that she needs to hide, that cause problems in her credibility, and that keep the people from who could believe her from trusting her. This is how Homeland works. And you'll watch when you get to season 3, season 4, season 5. The reason Homeland keeps working is because they replicate not the engine they thought they were building, but the engine that they turned out to be building. This is the feeling the audience wants. So in season 3, even after we kill off the dude you've been watching, we got to bring in a different messed up relationship. In season 4, in season 5, and hey, if you watched all of Homeland and you saw how they stuck that landing, the reason they stuck the landing after all those seasons is because they built that too around that central engine and a twist on that central engine that we've been watching season after season. That's an example of a show that realized what their real engine was and doubled down on it. As opposed to the other shows that I mentioned where they broke it. You break your engine, you lose your audience. That doesn't mean you might not find a new audience, but if you break your engine, you lose your audience because your audience is coming for a feeling. You made them fall in love with that feeling in your first episode. And the way you build that feeling is you write the show that creates the feeling in you that you want to feel when you watch this kind of show. And it might be different than most shows. Think about BoJack Horseman, right? This silly animated show that makes you cry. That's an unusual feeling for a silly animated show. But that's the feeling that Raphael Bob Waxberg wanted to create, right? So what's the feeling that you want? First, you land that for yourself. Then in the audience draft, you land that for your audience. In the producer draft, you turn up the hook. On the reader draft, you clean up the craft, and you work your way through until your audience gets to have that unique genre feeling, that unique experience. That's what they're falling in love with in your pilot. And then every episode after that, you've got to find a way to make it feel the same but also different. Because if you don't make it feel the same but also different, you will lose the people who came for that feeling. That doesn't mean you can't do wild variations. If you go back to my podcast on The Last of Us, when I talk about that brilliant episode 3 from season 1, think about how badly you wished for them to do an episode like that in episode 3 of season 2. But even there, even though it feels like they're doing something so different, there are those elements of engine again. Again, you can go back and listen to that podcast to see how that was built. So the center of all TV writing is this concept of engine. This is what we talk about in my Write Your TV series class. Television writing is engine. Engine grows out of character. and the feelings that the interactions of these characters doing these things create in the audience. You're going to capture that in your pilot, and then you're going to need to find a way to capture that in a way that feels the same but also different in your Bible. Now, it used to be that Bibles were long, and there are still some long versions of Bibles, right? So, for example, a lot of shows have pitch decks, which are visual versions of the Bible, used to create a feeling of mise en scène, of images, of what the characters might look like, of what the world might look like. But even these many page or many slide pitch decks, they're still generally short Bibles. In other words, the amount of actual written words you get in your Bible is relatively short and is getting shorter by the day. Now, there's another whole version of this, which is the Bible you get paid to write, right? This is, hey, somebody read your pilot, they read your short Bible, they heard your pitch, they understand how it works, and now they want to really understand it. They want a detailed breakdown of everything that happens in season 1. They want a detailed breakdown of season 2. They want to really start to talk about all the little nuances of secondary characters. They want to understand where the twists in your season are, right? They want to understand how each season is built, right? It starts to get much more complicated, and you're generally getting paid for that. And that's a long document, and you'll get somebody to read that long document that they're spending a lot of money on because they spent a lot of money on it. But the kind of Bible we're talking about today is the Bible you use to sell your script. And that Bible, you have very little buy-in. But it's so vital because, number one, you're early in your career. The chances are you're not sitting down with a huge showrunner and going like, hey, here's my new idea. Not at the beginning. You might get to that point. You're not sitting down with the president of Netflix to, go, hey, here's my thing. Not at the beginning. The person that you're going to be meeting with early in your career maybe is an assistant. Or maybe they're a new development executive who just a year ago was an assistant. You're meeting somebody, you're early in your career, and there's a good chance the person you're pitching is early in their career. They're the person who's still hungry, right? The young manager, the young agent, the person who's still hungry for young talent. And they know they got to put themselves out there and take a risk because they need to move up in their career. But they're hungry enough, they got to find new people like you or emerging writers or early or mid-career writers so that they can grow. And they got to take risks, but they got to take risks on this right project so that they don't lose their credibility because they got to move up. Those are most likely the people you're talking to. When those people read your pilot, when those people read your Bible, they can't make the decision to option it or buy it or certainly not make it. They got to send it up the ladder. So they got to set a meeting with their boss, or maybe their boss likely has a day of the week, maybe it's Tuesdays or whatever, where this is when the young executives get to pitch. Which means that they might have read your pilot a week or 2 weeks or maybe even a month ago. And let's trust their executives or their agents or their managers. They probably didn't even read it that closely, but they liked it. And now, months later, weeks later, even days later, having read a lot of other stuff, they've got to be able to pitch your project to their boss in such a compelling way that their boss goes, yeah, that sounds freaking great. I want to meet with this person. So what does that mean? You want your Bible to be short because let's face it, dude ain't reading your script all over again. He doesn't have time. But they can quickly skim your Bible and go, oh yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, I get it. That's how it works. In other words, your Bible is a formula, but your Bible's also a pitch. And you want that pitch to work very quickly so that somebody doesn't have to spend hours. They can, 10 minutes before the meeting, can skim through a few pages and go, I get it. That's right. I remember the pilot. Even though I read it a long time ago, I remember what I like about it. I remember how it works. I know how to answer my boss's hard questions. And even better, I can pass that on to my boss. Because all of Hollywood is a game of telephone. Most people are not reading a lot of scripts, right? Or they're skimming through them. It's a game of telephone where now their boss has got to go pitch her boss, and her boss has got to pitch her boss, and on and on and on until you finally get to a person who can say yes. And what you'll often find is that that Bible is actually doing more work at that point because already somebody has vouched the script is great. Now it's got to get up to the final decision maker. And at each level, even if they're reading the script, which I never believe any executive reads anything, but even if they're really reading the script carefully at each level, they got to remember it and they got to pitch it, and your Bible helps them do that. So we now know all the value, all the wonderful things the Bible does for your career. But there's one other thing that a Bible does that's extraordinarily valuable that I think is under talked about. Your Bible is going to make your pilot better. Because as you try to figure out your engine, you're going to realize the things that should be happening in your pilot that are not. As you start to figure out what are the replicable elements that I'm building in my script, you're going to start to realize, oh crap, I need to rewrite my pilot. When you come up with that great idea, oh, wouldn't it be cool to have a teaser in every episode? And then you realize, oh, my pilot doesn't have a teaser. When you realize, oh, these are the kinds of choices that my character is going to make over the season. And then you realize, oh, crap, in the pilot, they're not making those kinds of choices. When you realize, oh, this is the primary relationship that is going to evolve over the course of the season. And then you realize, oh, crap, that character is barely in my pilot, or they're in my pilot in a way that I can't feel their importance, where it's maybe going to be hard to actually attract the right actor to that role. Or maybe, hey, one of the things that happens is that different characters get introduced in different episodes, like happens in The Last of Us. Well, how are you doing that in the pilot? How are you handling your introductions? Or you start to realize, oh, actually, there's some really funny stuff that happens. And then you realize, oh, my pilot is 100% dark. I need to get some of that humor in there. Your pilot's a blueprint. So as you start to figure out the replicable elements that are going to make your Bible work, you're going to realize that you need to do a rewrite on your pilot. And that rewrite is going to make your pilot better. Now, a lot of people go, well, shouldn't I just write the Bible first so I don't have to go through all those rewrites? And the answer to that is, how good of a writer are you? And I don't mean how talented, I mean how experienced are you? Even at this point in my career, it is easier for me to write a script and then turn that into a Bible than to write a Bible without a script. Because the more I know the characters, again, as we said, all of Engine grows out of characters. Right? Engine grows out of relationships. Your life feels the way your life feels because of the characters in it. Yes, there's work. Yes, there are other elements, and you might even say that those are characters too, right? There are world elements. But ultimately, it's the people around you that create the engine of your life. It's who you are and what you want, and how you bounce up against the people you spend the most time with. If your work is heaven, my work is heaven. I freaking love my work, right? I get to do this for a living. But my work is not just heaven because I get to teach screenwriting. My work is heaven because of the students that are in the room. My work is heaven because of the characters that you don't even know. People like Jamie LeBov, people like A.L. Markovici, people like James Couch, right? These incredible people who work at my school and make all of this possible, right? My life, the feeling of my life, what's heaven and what's hell about my life, just like what's heaven and hell about your life, what's beautiful, what's sublime, what's frustrating, what's hard, all the genre feelings of your life grow out of the characters in it and the way characters put pressure on each other. Same is true in TV writing. So yes, we have world elements. Yes, there are other elements we can talk about, but most of your engine is going to grow out of your characters. You can see that even in a show like Pluribus, right? There are so many episodes where she is alone. And if you look at those episodes where she is alone, Those episodes are so much harder. Is brilliant. That's Vince Gilligan. That's one of the best living writers. As brilliant as he is, and as brilliant as she is as an actor, it is extremely challenging to write those episodes and make those episodes work. But then you watch those episodes where Zosha is in the episode with her. And you watch how the whole feeling of that episode transforms. Because her relationship with Zosha is actually the heart of what we're enjoying about that show. And if you get away from Zosha too long, it becomes much harder to develop plot. Everything slows down. And the feeling of the show changes. But you put Zosha in the room with her, and suddenly Pluribus works. Or if you agree that Pluribus works, it could be argued that Pluribus doesn't work. It's extreme feelings on both sides. But what works in Pluribus grows out of that relationship. Yes, it's a great world and a great hook. But Engine grows out primarily of relationships. So trying to build relationships between complicated characters that you haven't written yet requires a level of expertise that, let's face it, most screenwriters just don't have. Even most professional writers just don't have. You have to be able to visualize a completely foreign person without having written them, and visualize how they're going to put pressure on everybody around them. Whereas if you take a character you really know, and how do you know a character? By writing them, right? You take your mom, you stick her in Pluribus, you know exactly what she's going to do and exactly how she's going to put pressure on the main character. You take your best friend and you stick her in Pluribus, and you know exactly what she's going to do and how she's going to put pressure on your main character. In other words, everything becomes easier when you know your character. So for most writers, especially newer writers, it's actually faster to write the bad pilot. I even recommend then writing episode 2. And the reason for that is that for many screenwriters, when they write episode 2, they will realize that episode 2 is better than the pilot. They'll realize episode 2 is better than the pilot because they've just, for lack of experience and craft, have spent most of the pilot setting shit up. And you may see that happen in some very well-financed pilots by famous people, but you will not see that in pilots that are selling by new writers, because you don't have the trust yet to set things up and do things slowly and establish shit, right? The pilots that really work throw us into the world at rapid speed, because TV writers need to be so efficient. Your craft needs to be so good. So all of this to say, you want to write episode 2 because often you'll realize, oh, wow, now that I'm through all the setup, now I'm in the meat of the story. And you might realize that episode 2 is actually the pilot. Or you might realize that episodes 1 and 2 actually need to be compressed and fused into one episode to actually create the pilot that you would have written if you hadn't been learning all this stuff as you wrote the original pilot. So I recommend writing episode 1, episode 2. What I like to do then, and this is for myself or for my students, is write episode 22 or 32 or 15. Write an episode that's far in the future. At this point, you've written episode 1 and 2, so even if you haven't formalized the engine, if you understand engine, if you studied this, if you've really learned how this works, writing episode 2 is easy because you're replicating the elements from episode 1. And it should be relatively easy to write episode 22 because, again, you're replicating those same elements. If you understand engine, you understand what you're building and how to replicate how each episode feels like every other episode, because you're actually building around a formula that grows out of the relationships and the world of the characters. So you write episode 22 and no one's ever going to read your episode 22. And guess what? It's not, when your show gets made, it's not going to be in the show, because by that time, there are going to be a whole staff of other writers. There's going to be development executives. There are going to be new ideas coming in. You're writing episode 22 for you. You're testing your ideas of what the engines are, the gentle, soft ideas. You're seeing, like, by episode 22, is this played out? Or would this still be interesting? How am I going to keep this fresh? How am I going to keep replicating these ideas in different ways? Or do I need to create another layer of complexity so that this actually has legs? That episode 22, even if the episode is not really well written, is going to teach you so much about what your engine really needs to be. Then you're going to work on your Bible. Then you're going to come back and go, oh, now that I've got a sense of the landscape, now it's time to start to codify it. What is episode 1, 2, and 22? What do they have in common? How are they really working? And at this point, it's going to be much faster to write your Bible. It's going to be much easier to write the Bible. Now, I want to be clear about something. You can write 100 episodes. If you don't understand engine, none of this is going to work, right? So yes, it's wonderful to write things. You'll get to know your characters. If you don't understand engine, if you haven't learned it, if somebody hasn't really taught you how it works in an intuitive way, not in a formulaic way, it doesn't matter how many episodes you write. You got to learn how this works. And you got to learn how to play with it while still holding onto your voice as an artist. You need to learn how to make it your own and get it in your bones and do it your way. But if you do understand foundationally how engine is built, then writing these 3 episodes is going to do it for you. You're then going to write your Bible. Then most likely you're going to rewrite your pilot one more time. Then most likely you're going to rewrite your Bible one last time. And then, and only then, are you going to have a real package, something you can actually put out there into the world. Now, I want to be really clear. That might seem like a lot of work. What is that, years of work? Well, you want to be a TV writer. As a real TV writer, you might be turning around an episode in a week. You might be turning around multiple episodes in a week. In fact, Pamela Cedarquist, one of our wonderful students, woman over 50, got her first paid screenwriting job working on Mindhunter with David Fincher on season 2. She wrote the Manson episode. Absolutely amazing, right? And there was a point that she called me and she's like, Jake, I have to cancel my ProTrack session. I have to write a whole episode this week, and I have to rewrite 2 other episodes this week, and that's all in 1 week. So what I'm trying to say to you is, yes, at the beginning, it's going to be slow because you're learning these skills. But actually, you need to get to the point, if you want to be a TV writer, if that's your dream, TV happens at the speed of light. And you need to get the practice in where you can bang out an episode quickly, even if it's messy, and then work back and clean it up. So this practice, right, even though it might seem like, wow, that's so slow, this practice actually gets you the muscles that you need as a TV writer to go like, yeah, I can do this because I practice it. I did it on this pilot and this Bible, and then I did it again on this one and this Bible, and I built a library. And by the time I got to my 3rd pilot, it actually happened pretty fast. And by the time I got to my 4th pilot, I couldn't believe the speed with which I could generate this. You are trying to break into a very challenging industry, and you need to treat it as such, right? You need to treat it with the respect of like, this is your art form. And you are doing this in a world of other people. There are a lot of people who are doing this who are just pretending. But if you really want this, you're doing this in a world of people who really care that much. And this is something worth caring about. And you just listen to a hour-and-a-half-hour-long podcast, right? When you could be doing something else. This is something you care about. But it's a process, and we need to understand the concepts, and then we need to build the muscles that allow us to actually master them. So as we wrap up today, I want to very quickly, this is not the only way to build a Bible that I'm about to share with you, but I'm going to share a very simple blueprint that you can think of as a model for the kinds of things that the Bible is likely to include. And then if you want to get really deep, this is what we cover in Write Your TV series. We get really deep into this, and we look at some of the greatest shows ever written, shows like The Good Place, shows like Game of Thrones. We look at comedies, dramas, dramedies, everything in between, and we learn how to write Bibles for those shows so that we can really master the concept of engine. And then we connect that with the development of our own pilots so that we can start to master those ideas in the writing of our projects. So here are those basic foundations so you can start to think about this is what a Bible is likely to entail. The first element of your Bible, which a lot of people overlook the value of this, is your title. Your title is actually the most important element of your Bible because it's the only one you can guarantee literally everyone's going to read. And in fact, when people are skimming through Netflix or HBO, what's the only thing you know they're going to see? If they flick to it, they'll read the title. The most important element of your title, just like your pilot needs to feel like your show, and your Bible needs to feel like your show. Your title needs to feel like your show. If your title doesn't feel like your show, it's not doing the work of a title. Now, you can have a great title, a working title as you write that feels like your show for you, even if nobody else gets it. But if your title doesn't feel like your show at the point that you're writing your Bible, you're basically false advertising. So you need to test your title. It might take you weeks to find the perfect title. You must test your title, and if your title doesn't feel like your show, it's not the right title. It has to feel like your show for you, and it has to feel like your show for the people who read it. The next most important element of your Bible is your logline. We actually spend the whole first day of Write Your TV series just talking about loglines. Loglines are so hard to write. It may take you a week to write a great logline. A logline is like a poem. People are going to read your logline and they are going to decide, do I read the rest or not? Do I read the pilot? Do I read the Bible? Can I sell this? Your logline, oh my God, online there is just so much bad information about loglines written by people who obviously have never, ever, ever sold a script or maybe even been in a meeting. Your logline has to feel like your show. And it has to capture the essence of your show, and it has to capture the feeling of the engine. And it has to give the person enough of a sense that, yes, this is not just a pilot. This thing has legs. That's an incredibly challenging thing to do, but you can do it. You just need to learn. So the title, a logline that feels like your show, and that captures the essence of what it is, who the characters are, and how it works. The other thing to know about a logline is you have to make the assumption, no matter how original you think your idea is, that somebody else is writing a similar idea, guaranteed. And in fact, if you're pitching the right producer, that producer is looking for those kinds of ideas, and they're probably reading other ideas like this. So the other thing to think about when you're writing a logline is, how am I differentiating my projects from others like it, right? So anything in your logline that you could say, like, as you'd expect, right, or as normal, or as often happens in these kinds of shows, you know that that's not doing the work you need it to do. The loglines are actually about those little twists that differentiate you inside of the genre. So there's another show like yours out there, but there's something specific and special about yours that's connected to your voice, your feelings, and your characters. And if you can capture that in your logline, it's like writing a haiku, right? You're going to need to expand it, and then you're going to realize it's too long, and then you're going to squeeze it back down, and then you're going to realize I lost something. You're going to expand it again, and you're going to realize, oh, it's too long, and you're going to squeeze it back down. It's like writing a haiku, but by the time you're done, you have this little tiny thing that does so much work for you in every query letter, in every pitch, right? Every single time you submit to anybody, every time you need somebody to remember what your script is about and be able to pitch it, they can read that one little thing and go, yes, I get it. The logline's worth the work. The next element is introducing your characters, starting with whoever you see as the central character. For a short Bible, you're probably introducing somewhere in the range of 5 characters, unless you're doing something really funky like Game of Thrones. And we'll talk about in Write Your TV series, we talk about like how to do those really complicated shows where you have really big casts. But even then, remember, you couldn't track all the characters in Game of Thrones if you watched it. If your logline is confusing people, it's doing the opposite of what your Bible needs to do. So you're going to simplify those hot, most important relationships that are the essence, the spine of your show and of the engine. As you introduce each character, you're doing more, and this is one of those really common mistakes, and unfortunately, people get taught that this is right by people who've never sold TV shows, right? They get taught that like, oh, I'm going to introduce my character. I'm going to go, oh, this is Jake. He's a screenwriting teacher. He's a nice guy. He loves writing. He loves art. He loves musical improv. He's a philosophical dude, right? They start to think that like a character is like a bunch of description. It's not what a character is. Character is, like you probably learned in Write Your Screenplay, he's a want, an emotional need, an obstacle, and a how. Another way to say that is a character is somebody who frickin' wants something and is making big choices. A character is a person with a specific how going after something in their way. And so when you're introducing your character, you're not giving a bunch of adjectives. You're actually capturing who they are, how they are, and what they're doing, right? By the time you're done introducing your main character, there's a good chance that your reader already knows what happens in the pilot. That they can actually feel the journey, right? Like if you're introducing Walter White in a paragraph that big, if you're writing Breaking Bad and you're writing a Bible in a paragraph that big, you're going to capture how Walter White, this guy who can't stand up even to his boss at a laundromat, right? This struggling professor who's got a brilliant mind, but whose life has amounted to nothing. You're going to capture how he discovers he has cancer, is afraid to share it with his family, wants desperately just to leave his family anything, and how by the end of the pilot, he has transformed himself. He has manipulated his own worst student, a guy who kind of sees him like a dad. He's manipulated him using that father energy for this guy who really needs a father towards his addiction in order to create a crystal meth empire. He's killed some people. He's nearly lost his life, and he's nearly committed suicide. He has transformed himself in this incredible way just over the course of the pilot. And you're going to need to capture all of that just in the way you introduce him. And then you're going to introduce the next character. If you're introducing Jesse in Breaking Bad, right, you're going to introduce the next character. And you're going to think, as you introduce each character, how that character puts pressure on the other character. So let's say I'm introducing Jesse. I might say something like, Jesse may be an addict, but he's actually the ethical heart of the show. All this guy wants is to do the right thing. And perhaps he's the only person in Breaking Bad who wants to do the right thing. And maybe he's not that smart, but at the core of him is something good. Unfortunately, he also wants something else. He wants Walter's approval. And Walter will ultimately manipulate Jesse towards the darkest parts of himself in order to get what he needs. Jesse will struggle to escape Walter's grasp and find a different kind of life for himself. But a life like Jesse's is very hard to escape, especially when you actually love the person who's the worst influence in your life, right? So do you see how, you actually don't just know the pilot now. You have a sense of what happens in the first season, but maybe even in every season, right? That's just two characters. Each character you introduce is going to add more pressure, right? It's going to, in a way, when you're creating an engine for a show, when you're creating a Bible for a show, you're just trying to make the most complicated knot possible, a knot that's like feels impossible to untie, so that as a viewer, episode after episode, this knot is just going to keep on getting more complicated. Movies work by reaching powerful endings, but TV shows work because they can't end. How you stick the landing on the end of your TV show, it's great if you do. But the way a show actually works is by getting the audience to come back episode after episode after episode. Once it ends, it's over. It's actually the journey to get to the end that matters. So when we actually end a TV show, we break our engine. Since we've been talking about Breaking Bad, when Walter finally admits that he loves this and this is not for his family, that's when the engine breaks. That's when the show is over. When Walter's relationship with Jesse is over, that is when the show is over. Okay, so you guys get it. You're going to introduce probably somewhere around 5, maybe 7 characters, enough that people can see how the season arc is and maybe even how multiple seasons work. So when you're introducing characters, again, these are also little haikus, right? These are little paragraphs that are doing so much work. But one of the most important thing is that the characters you're writing in your Bible need to feel like the characters in the show. And the effect of introducing those characters needs to not only capture the story of how the show works, they also need to capture the feeling. So if your show is funny, you got to be making us laugh throughout the Bible. If your show is cringy, you need to be making us cringe. If your show is terrifying, you need to be scaring us, right? You need to be delivering that primary genre element with every word you write. By the time they've read your logline, your title, your logline, your top 5 characters, your reader already knows if they want to make the show. But even more than that, they already know how the show works because they know what the engine is. They know what the characters do. In some Bibles, you're going to have world as well. If you're writing a world that maybe we haven't seen before, that might also be a part of your Bible, probably right after your logline, right before your characters. But remember, anything that they can infer about the world is not valuable. So if you're like, high school, there are popular kids and there are unpopular kids. There are jocks and there are nerds. That is not world. World is, at this particular high school, here's what's cool. Okay? Everything in your Bible is something special about this world, these characters. Nothing is normal. Okay. So by the time you've gotten through title, logline, maybe world, and your top 5 characters, you're probably through a page, maybe 2 pages, maybe a page and a half, somewhere like that. And the reader already knows they want to make this. The elements that are going to follow, you're going to do a synopsis of your pilot. Now, here's what's important. You've already captured the pilot in the way you've introduced your character. So remember, you're not trying to be redundant here. You're trying to give a nice quick paragraph that just deepens, that pushes further, that shows some of the twists and turns of your pilot within what you've already delivered. You're basically going like, you thought that was good. Again, here's what I really have up my sleeve. And you're reminding them, oh yeah, I forgot about that cool thing when I read the script. You're going to follow that with a paragraph describing what happens in future seasons. And again, what you're really doing here in a very compelling way is you're demonstrating the engine, what happens each season. So if we're talking about Breaking Bad, each season there's going to be a different bad guy. Each season the characters are going to level up their business. So they're going to deal with a bad guy at a different level on the crime side of things. In season 1, it's a street thug. But by the time we're at season 5, they're dealing with multinational corporations. So we're going to go from thugs to cartels, up the food chain, because ultimately Breaking Bad is a show about capitalism and how capitalism ultimately corrupts us. At the end of each season, Walter is going to be in a situation where he is likely to be killed. Over the course of each season, he's going to get opportunity after opportunity to actually go, I have enough. But it's never going to be enough, even though he's going to be isolating himself from the people he really cares about, his wife, his son. Every time he gets an opportunity to get out, he's going to fail to do so until things are ready to explode. And in the final episode, there's going to be a huge showdown in which science wins. The bad guy is killed, and Walter and Jesse's business levels up. Episode after episode, Walter is going to morally compromise himself, but even worse, he's going to push Jesse to that place of moral compromise with him. By the end of the season, they will both have done something that neither of them can forgive themselves or each other for. Science is going to win. The bad guy's going to get vanquished. And next season, we're going to reset at the next level with a new bad guy. You could then break down each season and how it's going to work. Do you see how quickly I'm moving? This is how the characters work. This is the real engine. This is how the pilot works. This is how season 1 works. This is how the additional seasons work. We're going to give more time to season 1 and less time to the additional seasons. And then finally, if you have room, one quick page with little log lines of each episode in season 1. Now, by this time, no one's really reading, so make sure your pilots are your titles are really good. But just by skimming the titles and the log lines, they should get the feeling of what the arc of season 1 is. And at this point, this should be easy for you to write because you actually understand the engine by which episodes can be generated. I want to emphasize to you, this is just one model for building a TV pilot. It's just a way of thinking about these might be the elements that you include. And your own TV show might have different needs based on what it is and what you're trying to build. The most important thing for you to remember, your pilot sets the hook. Your Bible reels them in. Your pilot delivers a feeling. The Bible delivers the same feeling. And all of this works together to do one thing, which is to create an understanding, a visceral, emotional, and intellectual understanding of what the engine is that's going to make each episode of your series feel the same and also different. Episode after episode after episode, season after season after season, for as long as you want to run it. I hope that this podcast was valuable and it's helping your writing. If you're getting a lot out of it, come join our classes. Come join Thursday Night Writes, our free class every Thursday, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode.